Welcome to the Market Mystics podcast. I'm Joshua.
I'm Kim. Let's dive in. Hey, everybody. Welcome back. I'm really excited about today. This has been a long time coming. We always say it's a super special guest, but this one is a super D special guest.
It may be the most special guest we've interviewed.
I think that's probably true. This person actually was part of the catalyst that really got us to step into podcasting and to start this show. Mm-hmm. And so he can be credited for pretty much everything we've done up to now and probably beyond. I mean, he made our logo. He helped us find the name. He got us set up with all the podcast, everything. He encouraged us to take our conversations from just conversations to being broadcast conversations. And I don't know if that's a good or bad thing.
He's encouraged us to be like slightly less scripted and just have a more free-flowing conversation. He's encouraged us in the way we've interviewed guests. Very, very influential, and it is such an honor. Mr. Jason Villanueva, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. That was quite the introduction I didn't expect, so I'm grinning from ear to ear.
Fun fact, this is my husband, you guys.
Whoop whoop.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
This is why he heard those conversations and had the platform to say, you should take these and make them into a podcast.
Mm-hmm. Was also going through our YouTube analytics the other day, and I think Jason was like our third or fourth subscriber, top 5. And that's pretty amazing. So he's been an OG, been with us from the very beginning, and like Kim mentioned, since before the beginning. So welcome, yes. Sir.
Thank you.
In the title originally, like in the workup of, we have show notes, right? Josh named this the Podfather, which I think is hilarious. And Jason would not want to take on that, but I think it's hilarious because Josh just said since before the beginning. And he really was him. I mean, it was him and the Father who were the catalysts for us doing this, stepping out and doing this. So that's awesome.
Yeah. Well, Jason, it's so good to have you here. Would you just give the listeners maybe like a little brief rundown of, I was going to say a brief rundown of who you are, but this is the question I love to ask people. If somebody else was talking about you, how would you want to be described?
Oh my gosh. How I would want to be described and what they would say are probably two different things.
Yeah. So how would you want someone to talk about you behind your back?
Yeah. I mean, I'm very proud of my entrepreneurial drive. I have a passion for business, for media creation, videography, podcasting, all those things. I have a passion for encouraging people into their dreams and their vision, and to not just dream and have vision, but to actually work it out. And so I would love to be known as the guy who helped people start things and get rolling and encourage them along the way. Definitely want to be known as an amazing father, an amazing provider, an amazing husband, somebody who knows the Lord in his own way and maybe didn't try and push all of his beliefs on them, but just encouraging them to seek the Father and have their own relationship, their own journey. And definitely somebody who did to others as he wanted them to do to himself. I'm really tried to embrace that lately. You know, it's scripture, so living biblically, I suppose.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's great. Most of the things that you said are ways that I would describe you. So I think you're on a good track for that. So my next question is like, maybe just share like a little bit about your journey and how what do you think was it that got that like entrepreneurial spirit kicked off for you? Because when you're talking about that, when I was putting together some things for the notes, I was like going through the different things that you're involved in, and it was like, I have 3 links there now, but there's like other things you've been involved in the 3 years that I've known you, like or 4 years, sorry, 4 years that I've known you. Like there's many other things involved in that.
Mhm.
And so like I'm just curious, like what do you think? Maybe give us a little bit of your background and how that like maybe what kicked that off for you.
What kind of kicked off the entrepreneurial spirit
Yeah.
scenario? Kim, I was having this conversation a little bit with your dad the other day, my father-in-law, Dave. And so we were just talking about how at an early age, it was instilled into me that I could provide a service or do some kind of work and make money, essentially.
Mhm.
And so bit of a brief background, but my mom and my dad divorced when I was like 9 years old. So I lived with my mom and I watched her work 2, 3, 4 jobs. I mean, I was 9 years old all the way up until I got my own job and everything. Like I watched her kind of bust her butt, and she was doing all kinds of stuff all over the place. But being a single mom, she couldn't provide everything that I, as a teenager, wanted. And so when I realized that I could go and, mow a yard or throw away trash for somebody or sweep a deck or whatever it is, like that put in me like, hey, you can do things to make some money and be able to have the things that you want, but then also be able to help your mom, with whatever you can as well. And so just even at an early age, yeah, I'm mowing yards, I'm doing this, I'm doing that. But then as soon as I could, I was working, and so as I guess as I worked, it was like, okay, I'm supposed to be doing something with my life, but I don't really know what, but I'm going to go to college, try and figure this thing out. So just fast forward, I ended up going to a trade school to become a graphic designer. I have an associate's degree in graphic design. But if you look at what I do now, you don't look at my life and say he's a graphic designer. I do all these other things. It's because it has evolved. But even right out of college, so I'm like waiting tables, going to college. I get a full-time job, but then I'm already doing other things on the side, working for a wedding photographer, taking portrait photography for people, still picking up shifts on the side if I can. Like I was hired as a graphic designer for a church. So even though I have a full-time job, I've got 5 or 6 other things that are going on because that's just the kind of person I am. Call it, maybe I just get bored easily. I have to have variety. I tend to flourish, I think, in that. If you tie me down and make me focus on one thing for too long, it kind of drives me bonkers. And so I think it's just part of who I am. Maybe the Lord put it there. Maybe I just, have this drive to do a lot of things and make a lot of money. I don't really know where it comes from, but I've been that way my whole life. And so, yeah, if you look at everything that I've been a part of in the past 3 years, some things have dropped off and I've picked up new things. And it's always like, what can I do? What can I do? What can I do? And I think it has a lot to do with my desire to be a problem solver as well. It's like there's just this thing in me that if I see an issue or have a vision, I need to figure out how to actually make it happen, not just have a dream or have a vision, but put some action behind it and see it come to life,
Where in that journey did podcasting come in?
So podcasting came in. So something we haven't mentioned that I was a part of is I used to be a pastor. I was a church planter. I moved to Wichita from Houston to be a church planter. That's how I met Kimb, and she was our volunteer coordinator. And so moved here to be this pastor and got involved in church planting. And there was this real big push for church planting and just this culture around church growth and, attractional church model kind of scenario. And I learned a lot of things during that time. I learned who I wasn't. And I started to question the things that I believed or had been taught to me specifically about philosophy of ministry. So how do you grow a church? What is discipleship? What is the role of the scripture in the life of the believer? Some of these things, like, okay, who are we and what are we supposed to be doing as a church? So a friend and I, we would have conversations all the time, and we'd get heated. It's like, well, the scripture says this and they said that, and we'd get kind of up in arms. And, it's like this TikTok, Instagram, Facebook culture now where it's just everywhere in the comments. So just take a Christian post that somebody says something that's, you're trying to encourage somebody, but then go read the comments and you've got the keyboard warriors who are going nuts. Well, that was me with my friend in our car on the way to work. And one day we were just like, we ought to start a podcast and have these conversations and see what people have to say and bring people on and have conversations around faith and that kind of stuff. So we started Salty Dogs podcast that ran for about 3 years, but that's about where it started. Was me and my buddy were like, hey, let's just have some of these conversations. Here's what the scripture says. Here's what we're experiencing in our life. It's not really lining up. Let's talk about that. Why is that the way it is? And, why am I the way I am? Like, let's have some introspection as well. And so we started this show. And again, as everything kind of evolves or progresses, we started audio only. And then we thought, well, let's start capturing video. Well, if we're going to capture video, we may as well live stream. So we were doing audio, video, and live streaming for our show. And, that really was the genesis of even my desire to help others learn how to podcast, learning what gear is going to be good for what scenario, learning mixers and all that stuff. And I could talk tech all day long, but that's kind of where that came from. And since then we stopped recording the Salty Dogs podcast, but it's still out there. People can go find it. And so you can go hear a very angry, salty Jason. If you just go search for that, it still exists. So that was how it started. Just me and a buddy having conversations. And it's that darn phrase that pops up in a lot of people's conversations. We should start a podcast. And then you do. And it's awesome.
I think
like the Market Mystics.
Right. I think this is really interesting, Jason, because we talk a lot about on this podcast, like the value of the journey, right? And how journeys are all going to be different. Like, we're not going to be on the same journey, but can we support one another in that? And I think the Salty Dogs podcast was such an important piece for you, right? I mean, because you were in this church planting, attractional church stuff, just like you were talking about. And you said it yourself, you learned who you weren't, right? You said, I learned who I wasn't. And in that, there was an unwinding that really needed to happen. And what you and can I just say his name?
Sure,
what you and Casey like developed with that was this place. It was kind of a safe place of unwinding. And honestly, they had a great following because so many other people were also getting to that place where it's like, this isn't working for me. What do I do? And I also think it's valuable that you stopped it. Can you talk about that process a little bit?
Oof. Yeah, I can. Our last season, Casey wasn't on as much. It was Chris Cerna, my nephew, who was on with me as well. And he was kind of in a rough spot. And so, we just, about that time is when, TikTok started to be a big thing. And there was a lot more deconstruction going on. And so there was kind of a lot more fodder for salty conversation. And so it really turned into us getting on the podcast and just kind of ripping belief systems, and I don't understand how they believe that. And that's so wrong. And the Bible says, and blah, blah, blah. Right. And honestly, I hope people watch this video because I need you to see this motion. But there was this moment where I'm thinking about the podcast and I'm thinking to myself, like, man, I'm really tired of trying to convince people. And then I just thought, it's really not my job to convince people. And then I thought, what do I look like? Do I look like the people who I think look foolish, who are trying to convince people of their paradigm? And I just had this vision in my head of a hand doing this, just like yap, blah, 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 yap, 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 yap. And when I saw myself like that, immediately I was like, I can't do this anymore. And I honestly think that it was the Lord that showed me that, like, this is kind of what you look like. And then I was reminded of the scripture that says, if you have not love, you have nothing. You're like a clanging cymbal, a banging drum. And then I think back sometimes on the podcast, and I just see myself as that little clown monkey, the circus monkey going, just banging cymbals. And like, what am I really accomplishing? And so, yeah, I had a conversation with Chris. I was like, hey man, I think it's time to pull the plug on this thing. And so the Lord kind of led him to be quiet also and kind of take a step back. And it's like, you really got to figure yourself out. And really with the podcast and having been a pastor and having had this platform and having had some level of success and people listening to the show and us getting emails and people giving positive feedback and that kind of stuff, you feel there's a little bit of pride behind that. You're like, oh, I was actually doing something. I was actually accomplishing something. But then I had the thought, like, it doesn't matter if I can preach a sermon, if I can get on a podcast and talk about the word for an hour or 2 hours and have these statements that people are like, you said this and you said that, and it was so good. And me having recorded a podcast and feeling good about the episode, like, oh, I accomplished something. But then I go home and I'm impatient or unloving or unkind to my wife and my children, my family, and those closest around me. So I have to look at my life and say, well, what is my fruit? And, there's a proverb that says something about the words of a fool are many, but the wise are, quick to listen, slow to speak, and I'm like, I'm quick to speak and very slow to listen. Love is patient, love is kind. It does not envy, does not boast. I'm like, I'm very impatient. I'm not very kind. And I start to measure myself against what I, see the scripture talk about concerning love and wisdom and that kind of thing. And then I just didn't measure up. And so at that point I was like, this truly is pointless if I can do this, but I can't do that. And so that was kind of confirmation, like, yeah, I need to step back and really kind of get my heart in order. And so we mentioned, if I can go this route a little bit, because I was thinking about this morning, like, I mentioned the word deconstruction earlier. And if, you want to ask the question, where am I now in my faith with all of this stuff, having gone through this journey, I've begun to use the term a reductionist. In my faith, I'm a reductionist. So instead of saying, let me deconstruct and look at all these different things, like here's a doctrine, here's a doctrine, here's a doctrine, here's a belief, and start to pick apart each one of those, let me just throw all that out and see what's left of what I truly believe about the Father, about creation, about salvation, about who I am, identity, purpose, love, those kinds of things. And so I was able to kind of land, people say rock bottom, but at least you're on a solid rock. I hit rock bottom, but I'm like, this is where I start, because I've built this thing that just so easily got tipped over like a house of cards, like boom. Okay. So I've built this faith house and all these, I was able to actually like knock all those cards down and say, hey, I actually like being here where I know what I actually believe. This is solid ground for me. And if I could tell a quick story. So I was in Colorado and we had been hiking 5 or 6 hours. My buddies went to summit. I was beat. I knew when to tap out. I was like, hey, I can push it, but I'm not sure I'm going to make it down. So I'm just going to start making it down now, because the goal isn't to summit. The goal is to come off the mountain alive. So I want to live to see another day. And so I'm coming down and, it's like this valley, it's like the seat between these two mountains. And there's this like river of rushing water, or like a stream of rushing water going over these rocks. It's like ice cold and clear. And then it goes over this cliff, and there's this beautiful waterfall. It's the biggest waterfall I've ever seen in my life. And then it goes down on this beautiful lake, and then there's a valley. And I mean, it just was like, I'm looking around, I'm seeing this beautiful scene, this beautiful creation, blue sky. It's nice and cool. I'm by myself. And so as I'm standing there, I'm looking around, and I'm taking in all the creation. And just in a moment, I was like, I believe in a creator. I'm like, I see you, creator. It's like, I see you. And then I got like kind of angry. And I was just like, all right, like, I believe in you. Who are you? And what do you want from me? You know? And it was this kind of wrestling moment where I'm like, I believe in you, creator. I believe in you, Yahweh, as creator. I see your creation. Creation declares your handiwork. I see it right here. And you made this for me. And I'm here and I'm enjoying it. And it's beautiful. And I love it. But I don't know what you want from me. And so in that moment, I'm like crying out to the Lord. And then I realized, you know what? In this moment, that's enough for me to just believe in a creator and exist and enjoy his creation. And so at that moment, I was able to reduce my faith journey, my belief system, all the way down to just that, and exist in it in a peaceful way. And so I ended up hiking back down the mountain by myself. I didn't know where those guys were. Our texting service wasn't working up there. I'm like, well, I'd better just head down off the mountain. And so I had another 4 or 5 hour walk off the mountain by myself, where I just was like with the Lord. And so I came off of that mountain thinking like, you know what? I'm just going to live my life, believe in God, enjoy creation, enjoy the people around me, and try and love as the best that I can. And if he wants me to do something else, he'll let me know. And so that's where I'm at now. I'm just like living my life, trying to love my family, provide, experience peace on some level on a daily basis, experience joy because of the people that he's put around me and everything that he's made for me to enjoy. And like, let me just live there and let that be enough. Well, what do you think about abortion? What do you think about this? What do you think about that? I really don't care right now. You're not going to get a solid answer out of me. And if you think that that makes me like a bad Christian, whatever, I'm a bad Christian, you know, that's where I'm at. And so I'm not trying to convince anybody of anything anymore. I'm not feeling any kind of pressure as like a pastor or a past pastor. My running joke is I'm a pastor, emphasis on past, you know, ex-pastor, emphasis on past. So I'm not trying to form some sort of theology that is going to appease the people around me. And that's just kind of where I am today.
So I love your experience on the mountain. I read a book several years ago. It was like 3-Day Detox, and it was talking about how if you just take someone like camping who doesn't have, like, you take them away from social media, their phones, and you leave them in nature for 3 days, how like there's actually a measurable difference in their physiology after 3 days. Like all their stress signals are lower, all these like measurable things are different. But the other thing that it forces you to do is to be with yourself. And in this world of technology where it's like, you know, you talked about like TikTok and like just you can spend hours scrolling through videos of different things, and there can be amazing things from it. Like, I'm not just saying TikTok's horrible or social media is horrible, but like it also can provide an opportunity for you to not have those conversations with yourself. And if you're not used to being alone with yourself, it can kind of be a scary thing. And so I'm just like listening to you tell this story about like, you're on this mountain, your phone's not working, you're exhausted, and it's like you're pushed to your limit, you're by yourself, you're literally alone in the middle of a mountain. And that's where you were able to see the creator. And I think that that's such a cool story of like, yeah, you were away from everything that could have distracted you, and you were forced to just look around. You were exhausted, and your body was just like, there has to be a reason for this. Like, what's going on? There has to be a reason for me. And then you see this amazing waterfall and you see this amazing creation that you're staring at and looking around, and it's like, well, it seems unlikely that that happened by chance, so there must be a reason.
Yeah, I mean, that was exactly the experience. I love going to Colorado, and every time I go, I have an experience with the Father. It's like super easy for me to connect there as well. But again, it's like getting away from the noise. Yeah, getting away from different frequencies and light colors and expectations and all of that stuff. Like, it really does do oneself good to remove yourself from the pressures of life, the busyness, the noise, the screens, the technology, all those things, and just exist with your mind and with your God, you know?
Mm-hmm. I think there's also something to be said about getting out of normalcy or routine, because I could be really wrong about this. I'm just hypothesizing here. I would imagine that if you go and you spend time in that situation every day for 2 years, unless you're super mindful about it, it will also become the noise. You know, and I do think, I mean, even in scripture, it talked about Yeshua would go to he would get away from everyone. Like, he would go to his mountain to connect with the Father, right? Like, he would remove himself from his normal everyday life. And I do think there's something in that.
Yeah. I'm 100% willing to test that hypothesis, by the way.
Just regularly get
He's
away.
like, we're moving to Colorado.
Don't tempt, in the words of Josh, don't tempt me with a good time.
That's so funny. What if we compromise and just go Western Kansas?
No,
just kidding.
No.
It's not the same. Well, I mean, you guys can speak to this. Like, you know, South Africa is still somewhat away, but it has become more familiar. So each time you go back, does it lose some of that luster? Or is it the same every time for you?
I think sometimes it has lost its luster. I'm just being really honest, because I mean, we're working in this project that's really focused around community and empowering community and really helping them to thrive. But we're involved in it at least twice a week from here as well. Right. So sometimes when we go back over there, it's not like that month that we spent there a couple of years ago, where the Lord had to like literally take us out of that normalcy, take us out of everything we know, turn communication down to almost zero, and then like show us something else. I don't think it's that anymore, at least for me. Josh, you can speak to this too. But it is still, there's still something deeply valuable in it. And there's still very much a connection with him there that I don't get here. And I think sometimes it is because it just isn't the familiar. Like, I don't see all of the plants that are there every day, which sounds crazy, but you can both attest to this. When I go there, I go nutso for their plants. Like the flora, like people love the African fauna, right? Which I do too, like lions and zebras and giraffes. They're beautiful. They're majestic. There's something we don't see in the wild here. But for me, it's the flora. Like, I will stop and look really closely at plants and look like a freaking weirdo, but it's just because I'm in awe of this different part of creation.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's amazing, Kim. And what I would say for me is probably similar. Like, it's sometimes it loses that disconnect, just based on what we're doing. Like, when it's super active and super doing, like, yeah, it's not as much there. But there was also one trip, probably the trip that we did the most. There was about a day where we were just kind of away, like kind of looking at some sites, kind of doing some things. And it was out of the ordinary. It was, even to some regard, like we got up early to watch the sunrise one day, and just like, taking a moment, even in the midst of what you're doing, to kind of pull away, to have that intentionality. I even think like last night, my wife and I went outside and we were sitting by our fire pit, just watching the stars and like not having deep conversation, not really playing on our phones, but just kind of sitting quietly. And that like made a just taking a moment to pull away from the normal, I think can be important. And yeah, South Africa has been great for that. I mean, for one regard, there's a 7 to 8 hour time difference. And so even if you are in a place where there's communication, you only have contact with your normal people for a limited amount of time. And so, and then you add on top of that the load shedding that they experience, and you can have like 4 to 6 hours during your normal day of no electricity. And so, and eventually that means no Wi-Fi. And so it's like, I know for the people that live there, that gets really old and annoying, but visiting once in a while and like having to have dinner by candlelight because there's nothing else, like there's something special about that for an occasional dinner as a visitor. I want to be clear. I understand the people who live there, that is wildly inconvenient. But it's just like a really unique experience to have once in a while. And so, and could we do that here? Sure. We could turn all the lights off, unplug the Wi-Fi, and do the same thing without it being forced upon us. But it just sort of like, it made me look at a situation that wasn't necessarily desirable as being really special. And so I think, like, to answer your question, like for me, it's the moments when I actually step back from the normal and be intentional about disconnecting, where I experience that. And I can do that in my backyard, and I can do that in South Africa. And sometimes it's easier when you're further away. Sometimes you need the mountain to be further away from your normal. So that's what I would say.
Yeah, I occasionally will plan a Friday off and attend. I have a good friend, his name's Mike Clifford, and he's part of a ministry called Capacity Ministries. And they have these intentional Friday morning, they're called capacity retreat or recharge. And so it's just saying, hey, we're going to take 3 hours on a Friday morning, and we're just going to intentionally focus on the Lord. And, there's going to be a small teaching, and we're going to give everybody time to kind of get away on their own and think about whatever we've just discussed. And they do it in this park here in Wichita. And so there's like actually a trail where you can go walk into the forest, and there's the river going by, and there's these beautiful oak trees. And I mean, it's really a great place to go get away and hang out. But one of the last ones that I attended, the topic was personal retreat, and they talked all about this. But one of the things they said is, if you're going to intentionally plan a personal retreat, then you need to make sure that it's far away enough to feel far away. And, like, don't, I'm going to go on retreat, let's say in Derby, and, it's like, 5 or 10 miles from here. It's not far enough. I'm still connected. I'm still city limits. Like, it's just not going to be the same as if I were to drive, say, out to like Winfield, which is, 50 miles or however far it is. So yeah, just one of those things, like, make sure you go far away enough. But there's so much benefit to this idea of retreat, and I think the Christian world really latches onto that and says, hey, let's go on a youth retreat, let's go on a singles retreat, let's do this, do that, do the other. But even with some of those retreats, there's still so much program around it that it's not really like you're just kind of taking this random arbitrary adventure into this space and saying, hey, I'm going to be alone for 3, 4, 5, 6 hours on my own and not have cell phone service and not have an expectation that, oh, go hang out for 4 hours, but then you got to come back and we're going to go to lunch and then we're going to go ride go-karts, but it's kind of cool how that it's like we're going to plan to go to Colorado because we love going, but then kind of that organic experience happened by happenstance. Like the plan was to summit, I decided not to summit, and then I got to have this experience that was probably better than summiting.
Yeah, that's amazing. Okay, so I want to shift gears just slightly.
Yeah, sure.
Because for the people who are watching on YouTube or Facebook, you will see Jason has a very fun background. And Kim and I have talked when we've interviewed some guests about being in a studio. So Kim and Jason run a podcast studio, and Jason makes these podcast tables that are world renowned at this point. And I'm just like, part of me is curious. Like, I know you've talked about your entrepreneurial spirit, but like, you've in some regard stepped back from actually doing a lot of podcasting but being now involved in like podcast equipment and podcast, like specifically podcast tables and podcast production. And like, does that, I'm just curious, like what that has been like, and what made you look at podcast and be like, man, the tables they're using are just subpar. Like I can do that better. Like,
yeah,
what was it that made you kind of go down that journey? And like, do you sometimes sit there and you're like, man, I need to start the Real Deal Villa back, or I need to do some Salty Dogs, or like, do you ever like look at that and you're like, oh, I want to do some more podcasting? Or is it like, are you just really loving the behind the scenes part of it?
Sure. A lot of questions there, but I'll try and catch up with it all. I'll just start with the podcasting thing. Like I do want to podcast. I think for me, the time commitment to do it well is a little overwhelming because I know what it takes. And so I have to look at what I'm doing and what I want to do and see if either I can create the margin or that's the answer. Either I create the margin or I don't, because there's no margin really at this point. And so I don't want to overwork myself and that kind of stuff, but I do love podcasting. I have been thinking recently about taking Fridays and making that kind of my content creation day. And so this last Friday I did record some content with a friend, nothing official, but we've had some ideas for some shows and that kind of stuff. And so, that's all in the works. And so I'll say coming soon, but soon is very subjective. The other thing is, as far as the podcast tables are concerned, being a podcaster and looking at my podcast table that we were using, I would just say there's got to be something better than this. I mean, truly, like I want this to look good. And what happened in the moment was I said, I want to have a studio that I'm proud of, because I would see my stuff online and it looked good, but I didn't feel like it had reached the caliber that I knew that I was capable of. And so I began to make some modifications, and then I designed this table, had somebody build the first prototype. We use that in our studio, and I thought, this is it. This is the table. This is the look. And just again, being kind of the entrepreneurial guy, I'm like, I bet we could sell these. And so I made a website and was very intentional about the keywords that I used. And that has now turned into a full-time job in building podcast tables. So starting the podcast table business coupled with my experience some years ago where I'm like, I kind of need to be quiet for a little while, I suppose. in conjunction with, it takes a lot of work to actually run a show. That's kind of kept me behind the scenes. And yeah, we run the podcast studio, and it's been cool to help produce other people's show and that kind of stuff. But I really do miss being on shows. So thank you for having me and allowing me to get back in front of the mic and the camera to add value to people in some way, shape, or form. And I do hope it was valuable.
Totally. Jason, I think it's super. I see that. He just threw up a shock out. I think it's fascinating how you did that, because it was really like out of necessity. You built this table, right? Like, so I want it to look a certain way. I can figure this out. But you also had a really unique positioning with it, I think, because number one, you're coming at it from this marketing standpoint, right? We've talked about this before. So in his business, he knows how to do SEO. He knows how to build the website. That is like his wheelhouse. And then the challenging part is building the tables, right? So first you had friends, like people you knew who could do woodworking and build these tables. And then out of necessity, it turned into you doing it yourself. And I have to just brag on him a little bit. I'm currently in our garage. We call it the garoffice. Right. But this garage was the place where he started. When he started building them, it was out of this garage. And then he outgrew that. And then he rented a shop. It was like a big step of faith, right? To step out and do that. He got this shop, and then very quickly he outgrew that. I mean, within what, 4 or 5 months?
It was quick. Yeah.
It was really quick. And so then he had to get a different place with double the square footage. And now he has, I don't know, 4 or 5 employees.
4.
Yeah.
3. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, so it's just an interesting thing. And it all came out of this place of necessity, right? Here's something that I need that would be really helpful in this thing that I'm passionate about. Nobody's doing it. Let me do it.
Yeah. I tell people that any problem that you solve for yourself that you can solve for others, that's a really good business strategy. Like, do it for yourself and then try and do it for somebody else. And so even like backing up some, when I started podcasting for myself, I thought, I bet there are other people who would love to learn how to podcast. So then I hosted podcast workshops. I learned how to do it. Let me teach other people how to do it.
Mm-hmm.
I need a table for our studio. Let me build tables for other people's studios. I know how to set up a studio. Let me consult and help other people set up their studios. Like that is where that, maybe that's that entrepreneurial spirit, because I don't know that most people think, if I can do this for myself, I can do it for others. Mm-hmm. They think, I can do it for myself, but I'm afraid to try and do it for somebody else and fail. Maybe, but I think that's how good companies are born, good side hustles are born. And I think there's a lot of opportunity for people to maybe do something they're passionate about, versus, let me go find a better job, or what skill can I learn to make more money, that kind of thing. Just look at what you're already doing that has made your life better, happier, more convenient, more stress-free, and then see if you can help other people do that for themselves,
I love that. You say it's that entrepreneurial spirit, but I would also argue that it's innovation.
Mm.
Right? It is. Here's something that isn't happening yet. I can make it better. I can help others have something better too. Right? Yeah. That is taking a step forward. That is advancing. That is innovation at its core.
Sure. Yeah. It's been an amazing journey. I mean, I could do 2 hours on this topic, but it really has been amazing to see how fast things have progressed. And just the one thing I want to say about the business is that I've always believed in the product. I've always believed in the potential of the business. The most surprising thing for me, or the most unexpected thing, just has been every step of the journey. I believe this thing's going to continue to grow and go, but living it out on a daily basis has really just been the challenge. But I'm not surprised that it's doing well. I just didn't expect all of the growth and the learning during the process. But that's really been the thing that's kept me going, is the whole problem solving aspect. But yeah, I always wonder what your perspective is on the journey, because, you know, from the outside or from next to me looking at it, you know, what does that look like? So I appreciated hearing your perspective on it too.
I really do think so. One of my favorite things to watch with you is how excited you get when you get a new order. So we're like, what, 2 years into this, and still he gets a new order and he's so excited. And to see all the different places that are ordering these things, like there have been big name media companies, there have been big name media personalities, there have been high level universities, professional sports teams, all kinds of like big deal companies and people ordering. And every time, you should see the spark in his eye when this happens. He gets so excited. And he's like, you'll never believe who just ordered a table. Yeah, and I love that.
Well, good. I'm glad you do. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's still exciting. I mean, you know me, I get bored. And so as long as it's still exciting in some way, shape, or form, I'm going to keep doing it the best that I can and growing with it, and, you know, taking it as far as I can take it. I keep saying that I'm on the wave. I'm just going to ride the wave. And then, you know, if the wave takes me to shore and I get to lay on the beach, that's awesome. That's my goal. I'm going to ride this wave until we get to lay on beaches, baby.
Yes. It's my dream come true.
That's an amazing way to phrase that. I love it.
Oh, fun. Yeah. Awesome.
Well, Jason, thank you so much for joining us today. I would love to have you back and continue some of your 2-hour conversation on this. But it is an honor, and we are so grateful for just your encouragement and help in getting Market Mystics off the ground and running. Like it's truly an honor to be your friend, and I'm so thankful for that and to have you in my life. So thank you for joining us and sharing your wealth with our listeners today.
Yeah. Ditto, Joshua. Ditto.
Jason, I appreciate you. Even though it was a little reluctant to come on the show.
Oh, I thought your appreciation was reluctant.
No, the reluctance to come on the show. I really, really value what you brought. And I know that you might question what you carry and the value that it might hold, but it's immense. And I tried to tell you this week, and I'm telling you again now, I think people need to hear these things, you know, everywhere from like the reduction of your faith, or your theology, I suppose, to, you know, getting salty about things. This is like a very normal thing and so relatable. It really is. Like, I'm not even kidding about it. To like having all of those things kind of build up and propel you into something new, that has propelled you into something new, that is you walking out your passion. These are the kinds of things that people need to hear, and it is wildly valuable.
Thank you.
And it may just be the catalyst that gets someone to go, okay, you know what? This is the sign I need to actually start that thing.
Yeah, I hope so. Podcasttables.shop is my website. That's not a shameless plug. It's because if you want to contact me and ask me about anything that you've heard on the podcast, if you want some help thinking through business, whatever it is, you can contact me from that website. So it would be pretty cool if I got an email from Podcast Table Shop, it's like, I heard you on Market Mystics. So somebody out there make that happen. Let's go.
I love it.
Yep. Well, thanks again, Jason. Thank you, listeners, for being with us. We will put all of his websites and all the things in the show notes. So if you want to check out his tables, if you want to check out Salty Dogs podcast, all the other podcast things that he's involved in. You can do that quickly and easily. But until next time, we'll see you.
Thank you for sticking around. Listen for new episodes every Monday and Thursday. Find us on all social media platforms by searching for Market Mystics. Don't forget to follow and subscribe. Visit upperroomcd.com where you can find more information about the hosts, projects, and guests. Go deeper by booking a coaching appointment focused on redefining identity and wealth in your life. See you next time.